So I think it is also highly significant that we are gathered here today for this dialogue on how the information technology has, in my opinion, created for us in the last few years extraordinary new tools that can, in fact, transform, I believe, completely, and I hope to argue, what we will be able to do. And as Jennifer mentioned, it was at the World Ocean Summit organized by The Economist in Singapore only 2 years ago that we started talking about how we could link what Google is doing and the Icelandic group. And then I was privileged to host your delegation in Iceland and introduce you to some of our IT companies where you could see for yourself that this model actually works, and it's also an extraordinary journey. And then last October at the first assembly of the newly created Arctic Circle, both Jennifer and Eric Smith came and presented a part of the Google vision on the Arctic. And I think it is very interesting reflection, as I will mention later on, how the Arctic has become the new testing territory for international cooperation in this field. At this first assembly of the Arctic Circle, we had over 1,200 participants from more than 40 countries. And it became, in its first meeting, the most widely international gathering on the Arctic. So I want to thank you for inviting me to be here with you and to participate in the dialogue. I'm going to sit in on many of your discussions on the talks today and tomorrow, because I've also come here to learn, and I've also come here to listen, because I believe this is a joint effort, this is a joint exercise, but especially because, as we all know, time is extremely short. We only have a few decades to create this necessary success to preserve the fundamental character of the oceans. So, few decades is not a long time to preserve the preservation of the ocean resources. And just to remind myself and all of us how short time it is, I've already been president 18 years, which many people believe is long enough. But it just demonstrates how short, in fact, 34 years actually is. But I also fundamentally believe that the premise of our deliberations and everybody's deliberation is the humble acknowledgement that we, meaning mankind, are still in the early stages of understanding the forces which dominate the seas and determine the future. Early stages of knowing the laws which govern the harmony between the different species and the balance which must prevail between the various biosystems in the ocean. And at the World Ocean Summit in Singapore 2 years ago, I told the story of how I met Thor Heyerdahl in the early years of my presidency, 15, 16 years ago. He was the great ocean hero to the people of my generation. And he told me in a remarkable conversation that mankind knew less about the oceans than we know about the moon. And I first thought this was an old, rather angry, frustrated man complaining about the situation. But it's actually true. Due to the race between the Soviets and the Americans to land on the moon, we know more about the moon and about the global ocean. And certainly, we lack a sufficient awareness of how the aggressive arrival, and I emphasize that, the aggressive arrival of Homo economicus in the presence of fishing companies and large global corporations in this field has in the recent 10 or 20 years challenged the sustainability of the ocean. Therefore, the international dialogue on the oceans, negotiations and discussions must take into account, in my opinion, this fundamental truth that our journey, despite the fact that we have a short time, is still in its early stages. And our common knowledge is so limited that the ocean must always be giving the benefit of the doubt. That must be the fundamental principle. And economic utilization must everywhere rest on sound scientific recommendations. Because otherwise we will destroy what to future generations is the essence of their inheritance. But I believe that the gathering here today is a clear manifestation that thanks to progress that has been made in many fields, but especially the fundamental essence of advanced IT technologies, we can now effectively and practically, and that's one of the reasons why I've traveled a long way to be with you here today and tomorrow. We can now effectively work for a fundamental breakthrough. And I can assure you that many Icelandic partners are willing to be with you on that journey. Because we believe strongly that the Icelandic model, the proven Icelandic model of ocean management, can be helpful both as a reference point. When people are arguing what things can be done, the Icelandic model can be used as a reference point to demonstrate that they can in fact be done. But also it can be used as an inspiration that it is indeed possible to combine the protection of the fish stocks and creating a highly profitable and economically successful fishing industry at the same time. One of the reasons why we have recovered after the bank collapse and the great financial crisis, which made us for a while the #1 exhibit of a financially failed state, and I now am at the liberty to travel the world to talk about other issues. One of the fundamental reasons is the sustainability of the fish stocks that we have preserved in previous decades, and the creation of an effective, profit-driven fishing sector that has been the driving force to take us out of the financial crisis. Demonstrating the fundamental truth that it's an effective way to get out of a huge, colossal financial collapse, to have a sustainable fishing policy and protect the ocean resources. And part of the reason is that our struggle, which I'm not going to go into here, but it's worth remembering that it was a tough struggle, to extend our economic zone from 4 miles, as it was during my teenage years, to 200 miles, was in fact, as we saw it, a direct continuation of our independence campaign. Because the young republic would not have survived economically if we had not succeeded in expanding the fishing fund. And let us remember that when we did it to 12 miles and 50 miles, almost every country in the world, definitely in the advanced world, was against that move. So now, on the basis of that extension, we have for decades given the Marine Research Institute in Iceland, by law, a fundamental formal role in determining the annual catch of the various species. And also given it the authority which it has on its own, on the basis of science, to close areas to fishing vessels when the protection of spawning fish so requires. But of course, if you look back at how this was made into law and the early years of that practice, many politicians and local community leaders, and definitely a big part of the fishing community, was against it. Did not accept the scientific recommendation because they believed that their inherent knowledge of the fishing sector was a better guide than scientific recommendation. But gradually we overcame that stumbling block. So now nobody, whatever political party in my country, doubts that sustainable fishing policy has to be based on detailed, advanced scientific recommendations. And to strengthen this system, we developed in the 1980s a comprehensive regime of catch quotas for every vessel, and making them transferable in the 1990s. And although, of course, this system, like every system, has its faults and is still hotly debated in my country, and has to some extent had bad effect on smaller fishing communities when the quotas are being transferred. It, however, has enabled us to become the only European country which can point in the last 20 or 30 years to a record of sustaining the fish stocks completely, while at the same time building up a highly profitable and successful fishing industry. And to me, it is somewhat mind-boggling to have to face the fact that Europe, that most of the time presents itself as an advanced part of the world, perhaps the most advanced in its own mind, environmentally part of the world, has such a bad record of destroying its fish stocks almost in the whole of the European ocean. So, what is also an interesting part of this development in Iceland is how the fishing sector became the testing ground for various engineering innovations and various IT innovations, allowing companies in these respective fields with clever people coming out of the IT departments and the engineering departments of universities to test out new ideas and new methods. And among those is the computerized system which the Icelandic Directorate of Fisheries, the official body in the country, has developed in cooperation with innovative IT companies like Trackwell, which is represented here at this meeting. And this system allows the Directorate to have up-to-date information on the catch of each vessel, classified by species, port of landing, the fishing gear used, the fishing grounds, and the bias of the fish. And this information, remember, on every vessel, year in and year out, is then immediately put on the director's website and updated every 6 hours. So competing fishing companies can simultaneously check on each other. And everybody, anywhere in the world, can access this information. It's a completely transparent system of the comprehensive fishing sector in Iceland. And this has been possible because of the nexus between IT technology and responsible fisheries. And I believe very strongly, one of the reasons I am here today, that this nexus is in fact our best hope, our best political hope of reform and success. And that is why the role of Google in this is of such enormous global importance. And by being here, I express my full support for these endeavors. I'm privileged and honored to be a part of it. And I want to conclude here this morning by offering you 3 proposals into this dialogue, which I hope you can consider either during these discussions or in the coming days and weeks. The first is this. Focus on the Arctic. Focus on the Arctic. And there are many reasons why it would be a good strategy now, in the next few years, to focus on the Arctic. A, the Arctic has now required fast a new global significance, especially since after the Kiruna ministerial meeting attended by John Kerry, among others, last year. From now on, more than half of the G20 countries have got a formal role in one way or another at the Arctic table, which means that almost all of the big fishing nations of the world have now subjected themselves to the scientifically driven formulation of Arctic policies. And B, the aggressive melting of the sea ice in the Arctic has, as we all know, and is creating a new ocean. The first time in human history that a new ocean, big ocean, is being created in front of our eyes. And that is a fundamental transformation. So we don't have to rely on the centuries-old practices of the Mediterranean or the North Atlantic or some other fundamental oceans. We have a new territory in front of us and have to come together to decide, both the Arctic countries and others, how are we going to manage it. And then thirdly, climate change is already causing large movement of fish stock in this area. And the famous mackerel dispute, as you might have heard of, between the European Union, Norway, Greenland, the Faroes, and Iceland is a clear example of that. But then, of course, there is the factor that all the Arctic countries, even if the US has not formally ratified it, accept the law of the sea as the framework for moving together. But in addition to this, there are already existing instruments ready to be used to promote responsible and monitored fishery in the Arctic. And one of these is the Arctic Circle, which I mentioned in the beginning, that Jennifer and Eric came to last year, which we established and succeeded in making it in the first go as an important venue, the most international venue on the Arctic. And we have now decided that at the second assembly, which will take place at the end of October, ocean resources and fisheries, the marine management, and other related issues will be among the key sessions. And one of the reasons is that if you get the main Arctic states like Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and Norway to agree on using IT technology to monitor and regulate these oceans, it's a small number of countries. And for them, fishing is important, especially Greenland, Iceland, and Norway. And they can more or less close off the Arctic territory in this way. So we have, within the Arctic Circle, had discussions with the FAO, with the Director General, Jose Grímsson da Silva, and also with the head of the fishing department of the FAO, to participate in the formulation of these sessions, and both of them have expressed willingness to attend. Furthermore, there will be a number of marine research institutes and fishing companies, not only from the Arctic countries, but perhaps also from South Korea, Japan, and others participating in the dialogue. In addition, within the Arctic Circle, we are now planning, in cooperation with the government of Greenland, to host a smaller meeting in Greenland prior to the assembly in Reykjavik in the fall. And next year there will be similar gatherings in Alaska or elsewhere in the United States. And the government of Singapore has expressed a wish to host one in Singapore, gathering together some of the prominent Asian countries to explain their involvement and activity in the Arctic. So we already now have a roadmap ahead of us within the Arctic Circle that can enable us to bring the results of this dialogue here, bring various other partners that the Global Ocean Program can gather, but also allowing you to gather new partners and new involvement, but especially to present to the new arrivals in the Arctic, South Korea, Japan, China, India, some of the European countries as well, present to them this joint vision of the Arctic and the need for new regulations. So therefore, my first proposal here today is to formally invite the Global Ocean Program on behalf of the Arctic Circle to become, following what we did last year, a strategic partner with us for the next 2 or 3 years at least, and use all of these opportunities. The second proposal is what I call country-to-country zones and global commons. And I believe that must be the core dimension of our strategies, because unfortunately the record of global negotiations, trying to get about 200 countries to agree, is not a very good one, quite frankly speaking. With all due respect to all the diplomats and the ministers and myself and others who have been involved with this. We only have to look at the failure from Kyoto onwards to realize that going through global negotiations of that kind is not a very promising one. So that is why I have been convinced, partly following our conversation in Iceland when you came there, that we should concentrate on country-by-country agreements. And that is an additional reason why the Arctic is so interesting, because you only need a handful of countries to basically close off the entire territory. And work on country-by-country agreements in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe and elsewhere, supported in each country not just by the government but also by the business sector and the scientific communities, both public and private partners who recognize that by using existing IT technology, maybe taking some of the practices from Iceland and elsewhere, it can enable them to start protecting their own marine resources while at the same time building a highly successful fishing sector. This can be done by using the tracking devices similar to those which we have done in Iceland, and letting these countries, country by country, introduce laws where it becomes obligatory for every fishing vessel to have large or small such tracking devices. So one country after another will be able to have a system like the one we have in Iceland, where we can keep track on every vessel, wherever it is, day and night, 365 days of the year. And as I said in Singapore, I can't understand why, if we can agree to oblige every aeroplane that takes off to have a certain instruments before it flies up into the air, we couldn't convince country after country that since we have the technology, we should have similar rules and regulations with respect to fishing vessels. And then while we do that, we will start taking areas beyond the 200 miles, part of what I call the global commons, and start monitoring fishing vessels that are beyond the 200 miles. If they have tracking devices, we will create public platforms using social media or the openness of the internet, so everybody anywhere in the world can follow vessels that are out there in the open ocean beyond the 200 miles, and listing it publicly, like we do in Iceland. So there is a complete transparency. Anyone with a smartphone can find out where any vessel is, whether it's inside the 200 miles or outside. So what we actually do is that we combine what is possible with modern IT technologies and satellites and smartphones with the very old human pressure of knowing what your neighbor is doing. The pressure from the village, which all of us who grew up in a village know that is much more effective than any laws. The peer pressure within the village, that your neighbor will know what you're doing behind closed windows. I was brought up in a small fishing village in Western Iceland, and I can assure everybody in that village knew everything that close. And then, by combining these two elements, I believe the pressure of the system will be enormous on the fishing sector and on the fishing product. So let me then conclude by my third proposal, and then I will come to my slides in a few minutes. And I call that this third proposal, use 99%. Use 99%. I believe we should make that a new slogan for our discussion, even a profound goal, together with the sustainability. But I can see from the faces of some people you don't really understand what I'm talking about. So let me explain. It's not enough to work hard for preserving the fish stocks when it is clear that in almost every fishing nation all over the world, over half of the volume of the fish that gets caught is being destroyed without being utilized. This is unfortunately the case. We have created elaborate processes and industrial mechanisms created to destroy half of the global fish stocks after they're caught. So what's the point of priding ourselves of sustainable fisheries if we then destroy half of the volume of the fish that gets caught? This was also the case in my country 30 years ago. We, like everybody else, threw away more than half of the volume of the fish that we caught. We only took the fillets and sold them to America or to Europe. But then we started to take the heads of the fish and the backbones after the fish have been killed, and dry the heads and the backbones in a process using clean energy and mechanism, rather simple, not very expensive, which means that it takes only 5 days to dry the heads and the backbone in such a way that you can then keep it for up to 2 years, with preserving 100% of the nutrition value with zero infrastructure. and I emphasize that again, zero input. Simply because the drying process in itself is enough. And then we have now for 30 years sold this to Africa in a big, very profitable market where the local women vendors in the dirt street in Nairobi and elsewhere make a good living out of selling what was dried in Iceland maybe half a year before. This gave us about 75 to 80% utilization. Still about 20% were left. And now, if I can get my first slide, I think that would be nice. I'm sure there are some other people who would do that here. Oh, shit. We need a password. Yeah, okay. So this left the fish skin, the inner organs, and other parts of which we previously thrown away. And now in the last 5 years, we have developed industrial processes in Iceland, where we take this, the skin, the inner organs, the 20% that was left, and started to create various health and cosmetic products, like omega-3, enzymes, collagen, and other items. And these are now being sold at a high profit to both the health sector, the pharmaceutical sector, and also the fashion market. And at the Seafood Expo in Boston next year, a collection of Icelandic companies will come together to present formally in Boston at the Seafood Exhibition in this case for 99% usage of the byproducts of the fish. And then yes. And I don't know how many of you have seen a slice like this before. When you take a cod and you divide it up, including the skin and the inner organ, in commercially viable products. I could talk about this at great length, but finally, my proposal is that in addition to talking about the sustainability of the fish stocks, we should start arguing and explaining that we already now have industrial, commercialized, technological ways to make the 99% usage a concrete goal, a concrete target. Because, my dear friends, it doesn't really make sense for all of us to work so hard to get either international agreements or country-by-country agreement to sustain the fish stocks if we continue to throw away half of what we bring up here. And here, information technology can be extraordinarily helpful. Like Icelandic companies